Just about everything.
Well, good afternoon. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this conference, the opportunity to sharpen one another and to learn from one another and to have fellowship with one another. And most importantly, to honor you and to honor your Son, to whom we owe eternal life and the blessings of having a relationship with you. We pray your blessing on this particular session and help us to have an edifying time together here for this hour. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, well, my name is Robert Bowman. My friends call me Rob. I won't tell you what my enemies call me. If they're Jehovah's Witnesses, they call me an opposer. Or at least they used to. My topic is Book of Mormon Problems, what they teach us about biblical reliability. Now, this may seem like a strange title. I think it'll become clear as we go along what's going on here. But my interest here is not simply in disparaging the Book of Mormon, although I will do that, but it is really in holding up the Bible as, by contrast, an extraordinary, reliable source of historical truth and theological truth that God has inspired through various authors, and that we can trust what the Bible says, and that the Bible does not have the same kinds of problems that the Book of Mormon has. And that's kind of a sneak preview of the main point I'm going to be making, and I will explain that as we go along. All right, I'm going to start off with some basic information for those who may not have all of the background, but probably most of you do. The Book of Mormon is one of the four so-called standard works or scriptural collections of the LDS Church. The others are the Bible in the King James Version, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. You can acquire a print edition that contains all four of these, but it's a little unwieldy. I have two or three of them. So the Bible, as I said, in the King James Version, with at least some of Joseph's revisions in the printed editions, as footnotes if they're short, or in an appendix for the longer ones. I'd love to talk about those revisions, but I should probably forbear. The Book of Mormon, which Latter-day Saints view as the keystone of their religion, that's the book we're going to focus on. Doctrine and Covenants, which is almost entirely a collection of modern revelations supposedly given by Jesus Christ through Joseph Smith. There are a couple of sections of D&C that are not by Joseph Smith. The most significant of those came well after his death. The last one was in 1978. It's kind of interesting in here, just in passing, that Doctrine and Covenants, having so little added to it after Joseph Smith died, puts a big question mark over the claim that the LDS Church believes in continuing revelation. Because virtually all of the revelation that they have, that they base any doctrine on, was given in a 15-year period, and then almost completely dried up afterward. And among those revelations that came through Joseph Smith are a number of smaller texts collected later after his death in a compilation called the Pearl of Great Price. And there's some really interesting material here that I will not be able to go into in this particular presentation. Now, Mormons usually claim that they believe both the Bible and the Book of Mormon. In fact, this would be the official claim of the LDS Church, and that is they believe in and teach both the Bible and the Book of Mormon to be foundational to their beliefs. There are some asterisks over that, though. When problems in the Book of Mormon are raised by critics of the LDS religion, it is very common for Mormons to claim that the Bible has the same kinds of difficulties. In other words, if you point out that there's something wrong with the Book of Mormon, they're going to try to argue, among other things, that there's something similarly wrong with the Bible. But you believe the Bible, so you shouldn't have any trouble then accepting the Book of Mormon as well. That's kind of the logic behind that response. Now, in fact, Mormons typically view the Book of Mormon as more reliable than the Bible. I'll give you a couple of examples of statements that point in that direction. In Articles of Faith, which is one of those short little texts that originated from Joseph Smith in Pearl of Great Price, Joseph wrote, "We believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly. We also believe the Book of Mormon to be the Word of God." Now, as evangelical critics and others have pointed out numerous times, it's noticeable that there is a lack of similar qualification to the Book of Mormon being the Word of God as is attached to the Bible. Why is that? Why isn't there some statement like, as far as it is translated correctly, attached to the Book of Mormon? Well, here's why. According to Ezra Taft Benson, one of the president's chief prophet of the LDS Church, and I quote, "Unlike the Bible, which passed through generations of copyists, translators, and corrupt religionists who tampered with the text, the Book of Mormon came from writer to reader in just one inspired step of translation," end quote. Now look, if that's true, yes, the Book of Mormon would be more reliable than the Bible, and they should just frankly say so, that they don't really trust the Bible nearly as much, if at all, compared to the Book of Mormon, because according to Benson, and this is not an outlier statement, the Bible passed through all these stages of corruption of various types before it got to us. And if that's true, then how do you know what the Bible really is supposed to be teaching? According to Mormons, you don't without the keystone of the Book of Mormon and the other revelations and the living prophet, etc., etc. So, taking this seriously, we have to ask the question, is this contrast that's being made between the Bible and the Book of Mormon, is it valid? Is it based on truth? Is it based on fact? Now, Mormons bring up the same litany of biblical difficulties in responding to challenges to the Book of Mormon as skeptics do in their criticisms of the Bible. Really, you don't have to learn new apologetics to answer the Mormons' criticisms of the Bible if you're familiar with what skeptics say about the Bible, because it's almost always the same thing. Well, we don't have any original manuscripts of the Bible. We don't know what the original authors wrote because we don't have the original documents that they composed. There's a lot of places in the Bible we don't really know where they are. We don't know where those places were. And there are skeptics who will even argue that maybe Nazareth never really existed in Jesus' day and so forth. They'll point out that there's a lack of archaeological evidence for a number of persons or events that are mentioned in the Bible. That you can't prove the Bible archaeologically. You can corroborate some details here or there, they will admit, or maybe, if they know enough to admit that much. But skeptics will very typically argue that archaeology isn't really the friend of the Bible-believing Christian, because so much of archaeology doesn't seem to fit with the Bible. And of course, there are a lot of things in the Bible that are just plain difficult to understand. And not only are they difficult to understand, in many people's estimation, as they read the Bible, they appear to contain contradictions. There are statements in the Bible that are difficult to correlate with one another as you're reading the Bible and saying, well, how does this statement here fit with that statement there? And skeptics bring these kinds of problems up. Mormons bring them up to make their point, which is, if you can tolerate contradictions in the Bible, why can't you tolerate contradictions in the Book of Mormon or in the Mormon scriptures generally? If there are any, which they're not necessarily admitting that there are, but if there were, it wouldn't be a problem, according to the Latter-day Saint who's trying to defend the Book of Mormon. Now, in general, I mean, there are different motivations and different perspectives that some individual Latter-day Saints may bring to the subject. But in general, Mormons are not trying to argue that the Book of Mormon has all kinds of problems and it's a tissue of fabrications and mistakes, and so is the Bible, so what? Generally what they're trying to argue is, yeah, you could try to claim that there are problems in the Book of Mormon, but if you're going to go that route, you're going to have to admit similar problems in the Bible. And on that basis, the Mormon then wants to say, what's your response to that? If you're consistent as a Christian, you're saying, well, I believe the Bible even though there's all these problems that I may or may not be able to answer or be able to resolve. And similarly, the Mormon says, I believe the Book of Mormon even though I may not be able to resolve all the apparent difficulties or alleged problems with the Book of Mormon. And my belief in the Book of Mormon is a stance of faith, just as, if you're being honest, your Christians' belief in the Bible is a position based on faith, not on you've corroborated the evidence, looked at the evidence and confirmed that it's factual. So they want to be able to strip away any underpinnings of evidence for the Bible in order to have the Book of Mormon stand without rational defense necessarily on the basis of spiritual experience alone. If you've ever talked to Mormons about these things, about their beliefs, at some point you'll find out that they want to challenge you to read the Book of Mormon and pray to ask God if it's true, because supposedly you will get a kind of a manifestation or a revelation from the Holy Ghost telling you that it's true. And that's why the Mormon says he knows or she knows that the Book of Mormon is true, because they've had that kind of experience. And so their belief in the Book of Mormon is based on that experience, not on whether they know where Zarahemla was or whatever it might be. So they want to, and you probably already picked up on this, there's kind of this stark antithesis being drawn between having a factual basis for what you believe and having a spiritual or personal experience that makes you confident that it's true. For them, trying to establish the truth of the Bible or the Book of Mormon on the basis of evidence is a fool's errand. You have to ask God if it's true or not. Problem is, people can say things like that. But human beings are, in general, susceptible to evidence against their position. That's just a fact. Yes, we, especially in the area of religion, people tend to fight against that. But at some point, the 50-cent word here is cognitive dissonance becomes too great. The tension between what you say you believe and what you know the evidence says can become so great that you just can't maintain the facade any longer. You have to admit what you thought you were sure was true isn't true at all. Now, this happens to Mormons in droves. It's happening and has been happening to them in droves, especially since the internet made so much information prevalent and easily accessible. Used to be you had to send away to Utah for mimeographed documents. Now all you have to do is a couple clicks on the internet, you can see it. Well, once Mormons realize that the Book of Mormon and other aspects of Mormonism are false, what do? Well, having already dragged the Bible down to the level of the Book of Mormon, once they realize the Book of Mormon's not trustworthy, that it's not what it claims to be, that it's not historically reliable or valid at all, they tend to throw the Bible out as well. You could see why they would do that. Because generally speaking, they were concerned about the disparity between what they thought they believed about the Book of Mormon and what the facts said about that. And they weren't really looking at the same question with regards to the Bible. So what happens is, once the Book of Mormon gets thrown out, the Bible seems to follow. And so an awful lot of people today who are leaving the LDS Church are becoming skeptics. They're not becoming Christians in traditional Christian denominations. They're not joining some other sect. They are typically just abandoning religion, maybe not becoming atheists, but just kind of dropping out and saying, I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't really have any beliefs anymore, or something like that. But they don't trust the Bible. They don't know what to think about Jesus or God, and they just have kind of given up. In fact, that's happened and is the case right now for many people who are still card-carrying members of the LDS Church. They know it's not true. They just can't leave because they have too many family members involved. They may work with Mormons or at a business that's owned by Mormons or whatever it might be, and the cost is too great to leave. And they don't have something better to go to. So they just stay to have peace in the family and so forth. And that's true of many people in the LDS Church. We don't know how many, but it's a truckload. It's an awful lot of people. Now, if we can answer the Mormons' reasoning on this issue effectively, if we can answer their false equivalence between problems in the Book of Mormon and problems in the Bible, we can help prepare them with some answers to the challenges that they've picked up by osmosis or from their friends or from the internet about the Bible. We can prepare them for the time when they realize that something is wrong with Mormonism. We can prepare them not to immediately throw the Bible and Christianity out as well. It's my passion in this particular area of ministry in dealing with groups like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. It's really the major focus of the ministry that I had called the Institute for Religious Research, that we want to direct people to the truth of the Bible and of Christianity at the same time as we're criticizing the teachings of false religions. We don't just want people to leave the LDS Church. We want them to have someplace better to go in terms of beliefs. We're not trying to push them into a particular denomination or church. We're just trying to get them to recognize Jesus is trustworthy, Christianity is true, even though you've now recognized or are in the midst of recognizing that Mormonism is not. So what about this equivalence that being made between problems in the Bible and problems in the Book of Mormon? Well, my thesis, if you will, if I could use that term here, the main point I want to make is that there are two kinds of problems that we need to distinguish. There are what I call the right kinds of problems in a text, which are the kinds that one would expect if the text is what it purports to be. So if the Bible is a collection of ancient texts written by a variety of individuals over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years, we would expect certain kinds of problems. And we'll talk about what those are. If the Bible isn't what it purports to be, it will have a different set of problems. And in fact, the Book of Mormon has a different set of problems. These are what I call the wrong kinds of problems, which are the kinds one would not expect if the text were what it purports to be. So, just to put it very plainly, if the Book of Mormon purports to be a collection of ancient texts written by a group of, a string of prophets over a period of hundreds of years, but in fact it reads like it has problems with that particular interpretation of what it's supposed to be, and it reads like a modern book written by one person, that's the wrong kind of problem. Okay, the Bible has, I have a presentation that I give. It's called The Bible Has Problems, and it's a good thing too. And the point of that presentation is the Bible does have difficulties or things that are hard to understand or hard to reconcile or resolve, but it has the kinds of problems you would expect it to have if it is what it purports to be. That's not the case with the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon has the wrong kinds of problems. I shall illustrate. So what we're going to be doing here is there's going to be a series of points and counterpoints. And hopefully you'll be able to follow along what I'm doing here. So Christian critics of the Book of Mormon point out we don't have the gold plates. It'd be really great if we could look at those gold plates and see what really is on them. But we don't have them. And the Mormons' response is, well, we don't have the original manuscripts of the Bible either. And in fact, we although we have copies, the copies have innumerable variants. In the New Testament alone, the number of variants is estimated at somewhere in the ballpark of 500,000 variants, unique variants. Bart Ehrman's classic statement, more variants in the New Testament than there are words in the New Testament. And Mormons love that quote. I have a whole presentation on Ehrman and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims and all the people that are quoting him to try to back up something that Ehrman himself would not agree with. Anyway, so the Mormon says, we don't have the original manuscripts either. So the fact that we don't have the gold plates, it's equivalent. It's just a wash. It doesn't, you're not proving anything. There is, however, more to the story. There's a reason why we don't have the gold plates, if they ever existed at all. And that is that they have, I'm sorry, I'm going to use a kind of pejorative term here. Conveniently been taken away or put somewhere where we can't see them. Supposedly, Joseph Smith had the gold plates for months and months in two different stretches of time. It added up to well over a year. He had them, and he wouldn't show them to anybody. Not even his wife, who supposedly helped him to go collect them in the first place. Till the very end, then he let a select group of 11 men on two different occasions see the plates one time each, and then that was it. They were buried again, or they were taken by an angel. There's different stories about this. Who knows? So it's all very convenient. It's all very, it's a little suspicious, okay? Why don't we have the original manuscripts for the Bible? Is there any tomfoolery going on there? No. We don't have the original manuscripts because they were written in perishable materials. And they didn't have, vacuum-sealed cabinets to put them in or anything like that. So they fell apart. They disintegrated. Now, we do have copies from perhaps this third or so generation, maybe even the second, we don't know, after the original manuscripts. Generation meaning somebody copied, that's the second generation, somebody copied the copy, that's the third. We have copies from the second century, at least the late second century. Those might have been made from the originals, they might have been made from copies of the originals, we don't know. But the reason why we don't have the originals and have very few copies from the second century is because they were written on papyrus or something like that falls apart after a period of time. And most of the ancient manuscripts that we do have from the second, third centuries were all found in Egypt. Why? Because the materials last longer there than almost anywhere else in the Mediterranean world because of the arid climate. Now, this is exactly the kind of problem you would expect, that you would predict ahead of time. That if somebody wrote something on papyrus in the first century, we wouldn't have it today because it would fall apart and we would be dependent on copies. There's no gamesmanship here. There's nothing particularly convenient or surprising or suspicious about it. It's what we would predict ahead of time would be the case. If there were gold plates, Joseph Smith had found that contained ancient documents of inestimable value to the people of God in the world, it is not what you would expect that they would just be taken away again, buried somewhere, or taken to heaven, or whatever you think, if you're LDS, happened to them. That is not what you would expect. Mormons have interesting excuses at this point. Well, they were taken away because the Lord was worried that people would worship or revere the plates. How little these apologists think of Latter-day Saints, that they supposedly do that. That doesn't make any sense. Now, the Book of Mormon itself is a claim on its face that there was a group of texts running hundreds of pages that were inscribed on these gold plates in the ancient Americas from several hundred years before Christ to a few hundred years after Christ, a period of about 1,000 years. That claim is historically absurd. Now, look, did people in the ancient world have metal plates? Yeah. Did they write words on them sometimes? Yeah. Did they write lengthy books on them? No. That would be the most inefficient and silly way of trying to put out a document. There's nothing comparable to this known from anywhere in the world, frankly, in this period of time. Now, metallurgy really wasn't even a thing in the Americas until toward the very end of the Book of Mormon period, if not after. But even if you want to say, well, maybe there was a little bit of it going on, there's absolutely no credibility whatsoever to the claim that ancient Israelites living in the Americas, that's like three contradictions or absurdities in one fell swoop, that they were writing hundreds of pages on gold plates. It doesn't fly. Now, those kinds of problems, I mean, if you really want to believe something, you can make yourself accept the idea despite the evidence against it. But you have to do that. You have to believe in spite of the evidence against it. Do we have a similar issue with the materials on which the books of the Bible were written? Nope. Not at all. There are no problems whatsoever regarding the types of materials on which the biblical texts were written and copied. The Bible there's hardly even a statement in the Bible anywhere about what kinds of materials were used. Yes.
I'm just really curious, this whole gold plate, I'm thinking like a dinner plate, or is it a sheet?
It's like a sheet, plate, and the dinner plate would be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah. No, they're like metal sheets, like squares of thin metal that were supposedly bound together to make a book. And according to Joseph's description of these, generally indicated that they were made of pure gold. Mormon apologists know that can't fly, and so they will try to get around it. But that's what Joseph said. That's what Joseph's contemporaries thought, because they tried, allegedly at least, and I think this is probably true, they tried to steal them because of their monetary value if they were gold.
And it was the angel Moroni, who supposedly...
Moroni was allegedly the last of the authors to write on the plates. He was a human being who became an angel after he died. And because Mormons, that's what Mormons believe. Mormons believe angels are resurrected, died and resurrected mortal human beings who become immortal. And so Moroni is the last of these prophets, allegedly, who lived in the ancient Americas somewhere and wrote the Book of Mormon. And his father was the main author of the lion's share of it, And then Moroni wrote kind of some appendices to what his father had written.
Was it like some sort of a welding? Or
Some kind of a stylus or some kind of a engraving tool and people did engrave on metal plates back in the day, but I mean not like this. So some kind of these metal sheets. Sheets would be probably a term that people would be more familiar with today. Sheets of metal, sheets of gold, according to Joseph Smith, on which Moroni and his father and others inscribed the words that Joseph then allegedly translated into English in 1829. So, yeah, I'm glad you're asking these questions because I'm kind of jumping into things, and there's background information that's very helpful to have that I'm not necessarily giving. Yes.
Are they trying to put a little bit of Mormon teaching into the Chosen?
Well, that's kind of way off topic, and I haven't watched The Chosen. I don't think so from what I've heard. There are Mormons involved in it, but you should know that Mormons generally take the Gospels in the New Testament very literally, and they don't, in their telling of the stories that are in the Gospels, they don't deviate from those in any significant way. For the most part, at least, they just take them as they stand. And so if they're doing a movie or a TV series about Jesus based on the Gospels, they're going to tell it kind of what's in the Gospels.
Okay.
Now, but it's important to, there are these kinds of questions that are in people's minds, so don't feel bad about asking. I'm glad you did because I want people to, but again, I haven't watched The Chosen. I've watched maybe 5 minutes of it. But from what I've read about it, that's kind of where things are. So again, there are problems with the Bible insofar as we don't have the originals. We have copies, but that's exactly what you'd expect. And whereas we don't need copies of the Book of Mormon if we could actually access the gold plates, because that's supposedly the actual thing. And yet, for some reason, we're not allowed to have access to them. Now, I said we don't need them. We also don't have them. There are no copies of any portion of the Book of Mormon in its supposed original language, which was allegedly a form of ancient Egyptian. Now, there's complications even to that claim. I can't get into all of it, but supposedly Joseph found a set of gold sheets or plates on which were written texts that he translated into English and into what we call the Book of Mormon. These were originally written, according to Joseph Smith, in some kind of Egyptian script. Now, we don't have any copies of any portion of that. I'll talk about the alleged qualification of that in just a minute. On the other hand, we have thousands of copies of the biblical texts, Old and New Testaments. For the Old Testament from the 2nd century before Christ onward, for the New Testament from the 2nd century AD onward. Not a lot, but some in the 2nd century. Now, if you got a lot of copies, you're going to have a lot of variants, and that's just the way things are. But the point is that we do have copies, and from these copies, we can establish as absolute historical fact, whether anybody likes it or not, that the Bible is a collection of ancient texts. When exactly were they written? That could be debated. That they are ancient texts, it's not open for discussion. I once talked to a guy, one time, who tried to argue that the Bible didn't exist until the King James Version. It's like, dude, if you don't want to believe the Bible, that's fine. But that's not a credible position, right? We have manuscripts of the New Testament from every century, beginning with the 2nd century. Every century. And we have translations of it into other languages from the 3rd century and on. I mean, it's not a modern invention. Now, the one supposed copy of any portion of the gold sheets or gold plates exists today in one copy, we think it's a copy, of an alleged transcript, is the term that's often used, that Joseph's associate Martin Harris showed to a classic scholar named Charles Anthon in 1827. That's a lot of information. Let me just break that down really quickly. Martin Harris was a farmer who became Joseph Smith's first financial supporter. He said, I want you to translate these plates and we'll give them to the world and I'll help pay for it and we'll sell them and I'll get my money back and, presumably anyway, or some of it. But I believe in you, Joseph, and I believe in this project. Martin Harris's wife wasn't convinced. And so Martin kept saying to Joseph, I got to do something to convince my wife and other people that I'm not doing something stupid here. So Joseph wrote out on a piece of paper some characters that he said were copied from the gold plates. Gave the paper to Martin Harris. Martin Harris went to New York City to go visit a couple of classics scholars. That is scholars who were trained in ancient languages, mainly Latin and Greek. Those were the big ones that people studied. And Martin Harris showed this paper to Charles Anthon in 1827, which is 3 years before the Book of Mormon was eventually published. Now, years later, Joseph claimed that he'd written out this paper, the characters, and a translation of the characters, that is, a translation into English, on the paper, and that Anthon had pronounced the characters to be genuine ancient characters and that he had pronounced the translation to be accurate. Some statement about it being the best translation from the Egyptian he'd ever seen, which is utter balderdash because nobody had ever translated ancient Egyptian because nobody knew how to translate ancient Egyptian anywhere in the Americas and almost nowhere, even on a rudimentary level, in Europe at the time. They were just cracking the code about the time this happened. And Anthon didn't know a lick of Egyptian and didn't claim to, and it's just a mess. Even the Book of Mormon says that nobody could decipher the Egyptian text because it had been altered by the Nephites, the people that produced them. Well, then how could Charles Anthon recognize a translation as being accurate? He couldn't. The whole thing is just craziness. So there was no translation. There's no translation on the alleged copy. If there had been, Charles Anthon couldn't have validated it. It's a series of errors and unforced errors, one after the other here. Now, the lack of any authentic copies of these supposed gold plates means that we have to trust Joseph Smith and to some extent the 11 men who claimed that they saw the plates, that they even existed, first of all, which I think some kind of set of plates existed eventually, not probably at first, but at some point Joseph had a set of plates or sheets of metal, probably not sheets of gold. And so we really have to trust Joseph, and especially we have to trust him that they said what he claims that they said, because nobody else would have any idea. Even if the 11 men saw the plates and saw the writing on the plates, they wouldn't know what it said. So you're being asked to trust this one man, Joseph Smith, for an awful lot here. This is one of the big problems with Mormonism from my perspective as an historian and as a theologian, that we're being asked to trust one mortal, sinful human being for an awful lot. Really? God and Jesus appeared to you and told you that all the churches were wrong and you were to start the restored church of Jesus Christ on the earth? Who else saw this? Nobody. Really? Moroni showed you the gold plates in the stone box in the hills behind your house? Who else was there when this happened? Nobody. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Now, eventually, this is why it was so important for him to enlist the support of these 11 men to have some kind of validation of what he was saying beyond his own word. The problem There's more than one problem, but it becomes a problem. All you have to do is read the list of the names. The last names of these guys are Smith, 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 Whitmer, 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 Whitmer. It's like Mark Twain quipped, I could not have been more impressed had the whole Whitmer family not testified. So you're being asked to trust this one guy and his close family members and friends. The Whitmer family was his other big financial supporter. They even housed him while he was finishing the translation. Are you being asked to trust one fallen, mortal, sinful human being for the truth of Christianity? No. The many variants that we have in the biblical manuscripts confirm what we already knew, which was that the books of the Bible were copied and recopied and recopied without any serious quality control. No ecclesiastical authority with a stick hovering over the copyist to make sure they did it right. That's more or less what happened with the Quran, by the way. The Quran doesn't have very many variants. There are variants, but there aren't very many. Why? Because you copied it correctly or you died. That didn't happen with the New Testament. It didn't even happen with the Old Testament. There's just nothing like that in the case of the Bible. You're not being asked to trust any one person that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. It's not like the Christian movement started because Peter said he had a vision. And everybody fell in line and said, oh, wow, that's great. Okay, let's go. That's not how it happened. Jesus appeared to Peter, Simon later, and also known as Peter. He appeared to James. He appeared to Paul a couple of years later or so. He appeared to the disciples as a group. He appeared to Mary Magdalene. He appeared to all kinds of people. And he did this independently. These events weren't coordinated with one person. Peter didn't say, come with me, and I will let you see the risen Jesus. That's not what happened. Jesus appeared to people, and Peter had nothing to do with it. Two guys are on their way away from Jerusalem to Emmaus, because they're scared probably, and Jesus appears to them unannounced. That was par for the course. No one was in control except Jesus. And he's the immortal divine Son of God appearing to these people. So, again, the issue of copies versus no copies is not a problem for the Bible in the sense that it's what we would expect. It's a serious issue with the Book of Mormon. Goes to question of trustworthiness. Now let's talk about, yes.
If you don't mind me interrupting.
No, please.
I think my understanding is that with the Quran, that one of the leaders of Islam, maybe 100 or 200 years afterward, rounded up all the variant.
Yeah, it wasn't that long, but yes.
Standardized
Yes.
text, and similar thing happened with the Book of Mormon, isn't it?
Well, with the Quran, there were two streams of thought in early Islam as to the correct line of succession after Muhammad. One basically said it was a dynasty that was to remain in his family. The other said, no, it's whoever Muhammad handpicked as his right-hand man, and then on it like that. And so Uthman was the caliph, the fourth one, and so it was less than 100 years. And he said, any version or copy of the Quran that says I'm not in the correct line of succession, burn it. Now let's talk about locations, and this is going at the issue a little bit differently. But Bill here is going to be doing a presentation on the issue of the problem of the Book of Mormon lands, the geography of the Book of Mormon. I'm going to talk about it, but again, from this perspective of comparing it with the Bible. Now, typical Christian objection to the Book of Mormon is, you can't tell me where all these places are in the Book of Mormon. You can't tell me where they're located. You don't know where these things took place. And the Mormon response is, but there are places in the Bible that we can't locate either. So who cares? I mean, isn't that just a wash that, you got the same problem we have? Not really. We can't verify any New World locations mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Not any. We can't even confirm or determine with any confidence the general region of the Western Hemisphere where it took place. Now, I know what you may be thinking. You may be thinking, well, you're just saying that because you're non-Mormon, because you're not a member of the church, and I'm sure they know where these things took place. You would think so. I mean, as an outsider, that would be what I would expect, not knowing. But it turns out the Mormons don't know either. They admit it because there are groups of Mormons that favor different theories as to the general region in which the Lamanites and Nephites lived and fought during that millennium-long period. The academics at BYU and those associated with them think it all took place in a very small region in Mesoamerica, that is Central America, southern Mexico and Guatemala, basically, to use modern reference points. That's not the popular view. The popular view is, the popular view used to be that the entire Western Hemisphere were the Book of Mormon lands. The land northward was North America. The land southward was South America. The narrow neck of land connecting them was Central America. You could see why people would think that, and that's what the typical LDS view was until about 50 years ago or so. And now these academics argue that it all took place in this very small pocket of ancient Mesoamerica. No, they weren't the Aztecs. The more sophisticated even say, no, they weren't really the Mayans either. Well, who were they? Well, they were kind of like a subculture in that region. It'd be like 2,000 years from now trying to find out where Chinatown was in LA, or something like that. There are Mormons that think all the Book of Mormon events in the New World took place around the Great Lakes region, which is where I live. And they have tours that they will take you on to go visit Book of Mormon sites in the Great Lakes region. There are competing tours that will take you to Guatemala to visit the locations down there. Now, these are not inconsequential differences. These places are thousands of miles apart. It would be like saying, I don't know where Jerusalem was exactly. Could have been in what is now called Israel, but it could have been in France. That doesn't make any sense. You don't know what you're talking about if you have no idea what part of the world these things took place in. Now, what about the Bible? There are some places mentioned in the Bible where we can't pinpoint the exact location. They tend to be very small villages, population 12, or places from times so far in the back of history, so long ago, before people wrote, right? So there's no sign saying, this is where Abraham lived, or something like that. You're not going to find any written documents like that because they weren't writing. Even in Abraham's day, they were writing, but not much. We know the exact locations of hundreds of biblical locations. We know the general areas of everything mentioned in the Bible. We may not be able to pinpoint the exact location of a particular hamlet, a particular river that might have changed course, but the big rivers, we do know where they are. The ones that get mentioned a lot, like the Jordan River. We know where that is. We can go visit it. It's still there. There's no doubt about it. Now, some Mormons will say, well, yeah, but just give us time. Guys, get your act together. Figure out what part of the world it took place in first, and then get back to us. Numerous specific biblical locations are known. Now, this map here is not a evangelical, conservative Christian map of Bible lands. This is from the LDS Church official website. Okay? I don't think they're going to sue for me to use it here. Notice all the locations that they pinpoint, the cities, the rivers mentioned in the Bible. There's 3 places that they have question marks by, which Bible scholars have question marks about those too. Where was Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham was from? Was it here? Was it way up here? One thing's for sure, Ur was not in China, okay? Like I said earlier, it wasn't in France. Where exactly was Mount Ararat? Oh, some people would really like to know that one, where the ark came to rest. But in any case, we know the general regions of the storyline of the entire Old and New Testament. We can pinpoint numerous locations in Paul's journeys alone. This is from a website called BibleStudy.org. You can find maps like this in very many, maybe most, Christian editions of the Bible, where they will show you Paul's journeys. They'll draw that. Not only will they show you where all the cities were that he visited, but it'll draw you a little line to show you the route that he took to go to all of them. That's an awful lot of information. Do we know absolutely everything about Paul? No. But the general historical legitimacy, validity of the context of the accounts that we get in Acts of the places that he is supposed to have gone, yes. We know those places existed. We know he went to the... Look, critical scholars will question whether Paul really gave the speech recorded in Acts 17 when Paul stood on the Areopagus and spoke to the Athenians. But they do not question that Paul existed or that he went to Athens at all. That's not up for debate. As I said, Mormons can't even agree on Book of Mormon lands. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but here's a map that may help you visualize this. Used to be that the whole Western Hemisphere was regarded as the Book of Mormon lands. The popular view now is it all took place up here, not far from where we are in the Great Lakes region. The academics want to put it all down in here. They don't even know. In fact, there was a decision made by the LDS Church, an announcement made a number of years back that basically said, don't argue about this in church. Don't argue about this in church meetings because we don't know. The academic view, the Mesoamerican view, entails 2 Comoras. Cumorah is the name of the place mentioned in the Book of Mormon where there were 2 climactic battles killing off 2 civilizations. The Jaredites about 600 years before Christ and the Nephites about 400 years after Christ. That would be, according to the academics down here in Mesoamerica. Then allegedly, Mormon's son Moroni took the gold plates, carried them, no horseback riding back then, by the way, carried them all the way up to upstate New York in order to bury them for Joseph Smith to discover 1,400 years later. And Joseph didn't even look at the plates when he was translating them.
It's a miracle.
It doesn't make sense. Look, by the way, your comment, it's a miracle, which of course was made in sarcasm, and I appreciate it, brings up a really important point that I want to just make this note in passing. Not all miracle claims, not all supernatural claims are equally credible. Just because we Christians believe in miracles does not mean we are gullible and accept or should be, accept every miracle claim that comes down the pike. I don't have to believe that Mary appeared to people in a tortilla if I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Okay? I don't have to do that. I also don't have to believe that God and Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith in the woods in 1820 if I believe Jesus appeared to the Apostle Paul. I wrote a whole book on that subject anyway, so I won't go any further. But it's an important point that the miracle out, when it's used just to get around a problem, is not a valid argument. Joseph didn't claim that he had a miraculous ability to carry the plates, running around the woods and whatnot. The Book of Mormon doesn't claim that Moroni had a miraculous ability to heft the plates 2,000 plus miles for no good reason. Probably going to run a little overtime. I'll try not to do that, but here we are. The problem of the 4 C's. This is one of my favorite problems in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon says that there were the Book of Mormon peoples covered the face of the whole earth from the sea south to the sea north, from the sea west to the sea east. Now, I used to tutor people in math, so I know that's 4 C's. Where are the 4 C's? The typical academic position is they're here and here. Well, first of all, that's just 2. And secondly, those would be north and south of each other, not east and west of each other. But for practical reasons of trying to shoehorn the Book of Mormon geographical references into the land, the Mormons have settled on this being the sea west and this being the sea east. There's just no way to get 4 C's in Central America. For that reason, some people have said, well, the 4 C's are 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. What happened? One of those Great Lakes just didn't make the cut? And it turns out that, as best I understand it, the general viewpoint of those who favor the Great Lakes theory is almost the entirety of the Book of Mormon lands are south of all the lakes. Well, that's not going to fit the Book of Mormon either. They're trying to shoehorn basic geographical information or data given in the Book of Mormon into locations that won't sustain it. Now look, the Bible just doesn't have that kind of problem. Yeah, we could argue about where, Arimathea was. Joseph of Arimathea. That's nothing compared to this problem. Christians will often say to the Mormon, we can't confirm the Book of Mormon by archaeology. You can't support the Book of Mormon archaeologically. And the Mormons will say, you can't prove the Bible by archaeology either. Now there's a lot of misunderstandings here that I want to try to untangle here in just a minute or two. Mormons like to quote this statement made by Christian archaeologists: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What does that mean? That means just because you can't find something doesn't mean it wasn't there. Lucy's trying to find Charlie Brown, can't find him, decides he isn't anywhere. It's quite true that the lack of evidence for some specific place, person, or event doesn't falsify that claim. It doesn't prove that it didn't happen or that it didn't exist or that person didn't exist. So if we can't prove the existence of Abraham's servant mentioned in Genesis 15, that doesn't prove that he didn't exist. We just don't have any independent information supporting his existence. That's not surprising. What, you thought we would find the DMV from 4,000 years ago when we find his driver's license or his birth certificate? That's not going to happen. However, that's not the problem. The problem is a complete lack of evidence for the entire civilization of the Nephites that allegedly sustained its existence for about 1,000-year period. And it's really worse than that. I really am. What time am I supposed to be done? Is it 4:30 or 4:45?
45.
Oh, good. Yay. I was really sweating bullets there. All right. So it's not just a lack of evidence. It's not just absence of evidence. It's the presence of evidence that's contrary to the claim being made. Please understand this. If you don't remember anything else, try to remember this. This is so important. The issue is not, we can't find this place, or we don't have independent corroboration of the existence of that person or the occurrence of that event. The problem is a complete mismatch between the entire storyline of the Book of Mormon and all of the information, all of the facts, all the findings that we have from archaeology and other sciences for the ancient Western Hemisphere during the period in question. It's it's strong evidence against the Book of Mormon narrative. Now look, the Book of Mormon, I don't have time to go into this. Maybe you do a little bit in your presentation, I don't know. Mormons faced with this kind of problem, the intelligent ones, the academics and the intelligent apologists, will try to argue that the Book of Mormon, contrary to the impression that it gives people, isn't about a large civilization. As I said earlier, it's supposedly about a small subculture within the ancient Mesoamerican culture that didn't leave any large archaeological or anthropological footprint. So we can't prove that they existed, but we wouldn't expect to prove that they existed, just like 2,000 years from now, we might not be able to prove that Chinatown existed in LA. I don't know why I like that illustration, but I do. All right, so that's the, but the Book of Mormon simply does not agree with this after the fact rationalization. You can read through, the Book of Mormon explicitly says that God took the Jaredites, what we Mormons later called the Jaredites, the people of Jared, out of the land in order to make room for the Lehites, the family of Lehi and his descendants, to occupy the land after they had been gone. This is all explained at the beginning of 2nd Nephi. You read through the entire Book of Mormon. There are no references to non-Lehite or non-Israelite peoples inhabiting the land who are the dominant culture. When you read the Bible, there's all these other peoples that keep getting mentioned. There's the Hittites and the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans. Just, everywhere you look. There is one part of the Book of Mormon that mentions a lot of ancient peoples other than Israelites. Guess which part of the Book of Mormon? The part that's quoting Isaiah. There's lots of references to other peoples and other places and stuff like that in the Isaiah chapters that are copied verbatim into, or nearly verbatim into the Book of Mormon. Outside of that, you won't find any. And the Book of Mormon explains why. There weren't any. It was a place where there were no other peoples. And first the Jaredites and then later the Lamanites and Nephites were allowed to occupy that pristine land until things fell apart. Archaeology does not prove the Bible in the sense that archaeology does not prove that Jesus is God incarnate. It doesn't prove, that there's a heaven or a hell. It doesn't prove those kinds of things. But it definitely proves a lot of things. It proves that Jerusalem existed, that it was occupied by people that we know as Israelites and later Jews. It proves that Herod the Great was a real person and did the things that are reported. Pontius Pilate existed. If we didn't have proof that Pontius Pilate existed, it wouldn't matter. It just so happens we do, even though he's kind of a minor figure in ancient Roman history from the Roman perspective, not from the Christian perspective. So the whole storyline of the Bible fits very well the general picture you get from building up the evidence from archaeology and other disciplines. No, we can't prove everything, and there's some problems, there's some issues. We wouldn't expect it to prove everything, but it's doggone good. That's not the case with the Book of Mormon.
Hey, Rob?
Yeah.
The first Mormon that I ever witnessed to way back in the early 90s, we got to talking about Mormon archaeology. And I asked the question, I said, why is it that only Mormon archaeologists believe in Mormon archaeology? And he says, Mormon archaeologists aren't the only ones who believe in Mormon archaeology. Mormon doctors, Mormon lawyers, Mormon teachers. John, I think you're missing it.
Indeed. Yeah, that's. I said you were funny. Even telling a story that happened to you is funny.
I just made it up.
Now, in real history, the further back you look, the less distinct things are. The less clear are the details, the less external evidence that you have, the less information that you have to go by in trying to corroborate or confirm something you're getting from a text. It's just the way it is. Because the physical evidence degrades and disintegrates like those papyri, right? They fall apart and they get blown away by the wind, and you don't have that physical evidence. And so archaeology is like looking at 1% of the apple and trying to extrapolate what the apple is. Now, it turns out that you can actually learn quite a bit from that 1%, but you don't have all the information. But what you do have can help you build up a general picture and help corroborate a number of details. But the further back you go in time, the harder it gets. That's with real history. That's why we have essentially no direct external evidence for the existence of Abraham, a little bit for David, but a lot for Jesus and John the Baptist. We even have references to John and Jesus from outside the New Testament within 100 years, less really, of their existence. That's what we would expect as historians trying to be sober about this, is we'd expect less evidence for Abraham than we do for John the Baptist. I'm sorry, that's just the way it's going to be. Not a problem, because it's what we would expect. The Book of Mormon has the opposite situation. The closer to our time we look in the Book of Mormon narrative, the greater the mismatch with the external evidence, the worse it gets. Not going back further, but coming closer, the evidence starts to amass that it's not true. So the climactic story of the Book of Mormon is that Jesus allegedly, shortly after his resurrection, came back down to the earth to appear to the Nephites, that's the descendants of the original Israelites who moved there 600 years earlier. And he preached the Sermon on the Mount to them, a few adaptations, established a new church, taught them how to get baptized and all the rest of it. So he started this church. And very quickly, according to the Book of Mormon, everybody in the land, all the peoples of the land, became Christians. And they weren't even called different ites anymore, because they were just all believers. They were all Nephites, basically. They were all believers. They were all Christians. And this lasted for at least a couple centuries. Now look at, if these people were, as the Book of Mormon claims, the dominant civilization in the land for this 1,000-year period, this 200-plus year-long history of Christian utopia should have left some kind of archaeological footprint, some evidence that these people really existed and did these things. Not only do we not have such evidence, we have evidence against it. The culture of ancient Mesoamerica, and you could pick a different area of the Western Hemisphere if you like, it's going to be the same problem, didn't change significantly from before the time of Jesus to after the time of Jesus. You can go hundreds of years back, hundreds of years forward, the culture is going to be the same. What kind of culture? A thoroughly pagan culture. Idolatrous, bloodthirsty in many parts of the Western Hemisphere, including Central America, practicing human sacrifice as a matter of course for hundreds and hundreds of years. In the Book of Mormon, the only references to human sacrifices come at the very end, circa 400 AD, when things got so bad, according to the Book of Mormon, after they abandoned their Christian beliefs, that they actually started doing this. I can't even award them a half a point here, because the fact is, the Mesoamericans had been practicing human sacrifice for well on to a millennium at that point. So this just doesn't make sense. The Book of Mormon describes these centuries, the first 2 centuries AD, as a golden age followed by a cultural decline. In fact, Mesoamerica was just entering its golden era in the 3rd or 4th century AD, when they started really going to town, wealthy, big buildings, very, artistic, expressionist culture. So there's a complete mismatch between the Book of Mormon archaeologically, historically, factually, and the actual evidence. The Book of Mormon claims that the lands were populated by people from the Middle East who traveled by sea about 3,000 years before Christ and later about 550 years before Christ to the same lands in the Americas. The historical facts show, and I'm sorry if this disturbs your particular interpretation of Genesis, but I'll just tell you what the evidence shows, and that is that ancient Mesoamerica was populated by people from Asia, East Asia, about 9,000 years before Christ. Now, even if you want to take a young earth position, you're not going to be able to make this work in terms of the Book of Mormon. It's just not going to work. But I don't. The Golden Age in Book of Mormon civilization was the first 2 centuries AD. The historical facts show that ancient Mesoamerica entered a Golden Age after that time that lasted hundreds of years. Book of Mormon says that the Israelites living in the land were practicing metallurgy in a big way, and in fact that people before the Israelites, the Jaredites, were doing it 1,500 years before Christ. That's only about 2,000 years off. The Book of Mormon has people's herding and caring for cattle and sheep and goats and horses and all that. There are no flocks or herds in ancient Mesoamerica during this era at all. They just don't do it. What were the things going on religiously in the Book of Mormon during this period? The Book of Mormon in Americas, there was Christianity before Jesus even. There were Unitarianism. That's in the Book of Mormon. Not the word, but the idea. People are believing that everyone's going to be saved. That's universalism. They're fussing about paid clergy. They're worried about the idea of the canon being closed and there not being any miracles today. That's not what people worried about in ancient Mesoamerica. They were polytheistic, idolatrous people practicing human sacrifice. This stuff just isn't even on the radar. I'm almost done.
Just so you know, dinner's here. So
What's that?
So dinner's downstairs.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you all mind if we go like just a couple more minutes? All right. The Book of Mormon is actually very easy to understand. This is one of its big selling points. In fact, it's pretty insistent on it because it mentions something like 50 times how plain it is. On the other hand, much of the Bible is very difficult to understand. Now, I'm a biblical scholar. It's my job to read the Bible and understand it, but I'm just going to tell you that's true. Much of the Bible is difficult to understand. Why is that? The Book of Mormon is easy to understand because it is modern. It's written by people in my culture, Anglo-American modern culture. The Bible is hard to understand because it really is ancient. This is the kind of problem we would expect if the Bible is what it claims to be. See, this is my point that I'm making all throughout this presentation. If the Book of Mormon was a collection of ancient texts, it would be hard to understand. It wouldn't sound like Methodist revivalist preachers giving sermons. It would sound very different, and we'd be puzzled by it. The Bible sounds difficult to understand because it is what it says it is. Interestingly, the Bible rarely talks about plain speech and never suggests that Scripture is plain in any way, shape, or form, and acknowledges in several places that what it says is often hard to understand. I don't have time to go through this, but just putting things in context here, the Old Testament, toward the end of the Old Testament era is when the Book of Mormon allegedly started its history. During the middle of that, we have the New Testament era. Then you have church history, what we call church history, and Joseph Smith coming toward the tail end of that in the 19th century. If the Book of Mormon came from this era, we would expect it to be hard to understand like these books are. But instead, they read like books written in this era. And that's why it's so understandable. Now, if you don't care about whether it's historically valid, fine. But if you do, if you say you believe this book, you've got a problem. because it doesn't make sense. I've already mentioned the disparity between the actual problems in Book of Mormon era, in fact, and what the Book of Mormon itself says. This is kind of a detailed overview of it that I really need to kind of skip over, and I apologize. But let me just point this out. What does the Book of Mormon address? It addresses religious and cultural concerns of the 18th and early 19th centuries. Paid clergy, universalism, denominational names, etc. It does not address the religious and cultural concerns of ancient Mesoamerica. Now that most people know, or at least may have heard before. It also does not address the religious and cultural concerns arising after the Book of Mormon was published. Nothing about evolution, nothing about abortion, nothing about religious pluralism, nuclear war, same-sex marriage, gender issues, nothing. The Book of Mormon was not written for our time, 21st century, and it clearly wasn't written for the ancient period. It was written very narrow focus, 18th, early 19th century Anglo-American culture. That's when it was written. You know that because of what it does address and what it does not address. It's very specific. Now, some main points to take away real quickly here. As I've said and emphasized, it's not just a lack of evidence for the Book of Mormon, but a lot of evidence against it. Whereas there's a lot of evidence for the Bible, even though you can't prove everything, and it's especially plentiful, as you would expect, for the more recent parts of the Bible, namely in the New Testament. There are converging lines of evidence that point to an origin of the Book of Mormon in the time of Joseph Smith. There are problems in the Bible, but they're exactly the sorts of problems we would expect from authentic ancient literature. So I'm not going to apologize for the fact that the Bible is sometimes hard to understand, or there are statements that are hard to reconcile or hard to back up with facts, because that's exactly what we'd expect if the Bible is what it says it is. If you're interested in more information than I could give you in this fire hose presentation, I've got hundreds of articles on the website, and many of them dealing with the Book of Mormon at irr.org. That's for the Institute for Religious Research. And thank you for your patience as I went over time. Thank you so much.